Today is a new day. It will bring brand new blessings and brand new battles. But within every uncertainty, there is hidden possibility. So I don't dread any challenge that lies ahead, because I remember all the victories behind. And my confidence is not in my circumstance. The Spirit of God is my supply. I'm steady under pressure, and I'm ready for whatever, because whatever comes my way today, the outcome is I overcome. Christ is in me. I am enough. I can handle it. I can't afford to stay afraid or let my faith hesitate. My purpose is at stake, and He who called me is faithful. His strength in me is greater than any pain I feel or enemy I face. The promise of God is mine for the taking. Every plan He has made is guaranteed to come to pass. It will happen. If I don't back down, if I won't let go, it will happen. If I don't stop short, if I won't sell out, it will happen by faith. But faith doesn't take the fear away. It teaches me to fight it. So bring the battle. I'm ready now. I got something for Goliath. I can handle it. My power flows from presence, so I won't stay stuck in what was or worry about what will be. My regrets have been redeemed, and my tests have become my lessons. My focus is fixed, and my heart is expectant. I'm set. I'm not nervous about what's next, because my eyes are on the throne. I trust the one who's in complete control, the one who already knows how He's gonna work it according to His purpose. Even the worst situations are sure to turn in my favor. If I keep moving forward, keep moving toward Him, God is with me in this moment, and whatever happens, I can handle it. I know my help comes from above, so if fear insists on knocking, I'll meet it at the door. Life might give me bad news, but I've still got a good report. I can handle it. If I fall, if I fail, I'll handle it. Grace will give me what it takes to carry on. I can handle it. I have humbled myself under the mighty hand of God. Christ is in me. I am enough. And when the time is right, He'll lift me up. Till then, the lion may roar, but I see His leash, so I keep moving forward. Cause I've been down before, but my hope knows how to bounce back from rock bottom. What I need, God's got it. And I'm stronger, I'm better, it's settled. I'm ready, I'm focused, I'm hopeful, no hiding. I'm ready, I'm stronger, I'm better, it's settled. I'm ready, I'm focused, I'm hopeful, no hiding. I'm ready, I'm stronger, I'm better, it's settled. I'm ready, resilient, dependent, I know He'll deliver. I'm strong and courageous, the one who is able is greater than all. Bring it on, in His name, I can handle it.
I read a lot on the internet and in different articles and things, and one of the most interesting ones I've seen recently, I kind of follow her sometimes, is a writer called Peggy Noonan, and she writes for a major newspaper in the United States, and she writes about current events and things, and it's interesting her take on the pulse of what's happening south of the border and all the things that have happened in 2020. And I just want to quote from her, because I think it sums up a lot of the feeling in our world right now. She writes, I want to get back to national morale. All these dreadful economic numbers. You can't let people sink into defeatism. You can't let them think there's no hope or that things are in the future are just going to be bad. They're Americans. They know how to suffer. Even the ones who have never suffered a day in their lives. It's still in their genes. But they're like pioneers. You have to be able to believe that while they're on the long track, there's some fertile area around the next bend, or the one after that. They have to know there's a safe place where they can finally settle. People need hope. Americans live on it. We must return to life. This is where our bias must be. And that's by Peggy Noonan. And I was reading that and I was thinking, yeah, that's kind of where we are. I mean, you look back in 2020, I think a lot of us are going to want to finish or basically forget 2020 when it comes to an end. You know, we kind of opened the country. There were protests across the country about how we treat First Nations people, and over a pipeline, and that kind of shut down our economy and caused a lot of disruption and things. And then we phased from that into COVID, you know, and it seemed to be over, you know, across the ocean, and then all of a sudden it was here, and then we were getting all these medical reports, and we all had to leave our work and check our symptoms and social distance and not be able to check out our families and in with them, and then found out how horrible this illness is to people in long-term care homes, and we saw the death rates go up, and we see the international numbers, and we're still in the middle of this. And then recently there's just been a lot of protests over the George Floyd experience in Minneapolis, Minnesota, horrible death, and a lot of reaction to it. And you know, if I kind of look around right now, there's a lot of people shouting about things, and it's really, I think when this decade's going to be remembered, I think it's going to be remembered as kind of an adversarial decade. And by that, what I mean is not just around racism. I think around everything, around sexism, around different beliefs, different political bends, different things like that. There's this huge chasm that's opening up between people, and it's not a left-right chasm. It's just between people. You can sometimes find within these movements that people's attacks, even on their own, is harsh and domineering. And there seems to be, and I believe this is a total lie, there's this thought in our society that the cure to these things is political. And I disagree. I couldn't disagree more. I think it gets down to a heart issue. You know, as we look around, we look at, you know, the power games, the violence, the shouting, the name calling, the erasing of history. As I look around at how our society is beginning to treat the concept of free speech, and I know that changes all the time, but the idea that, you know, people discuss things and how you just kind of retreat into somewhere. You don't want to say anything controversial. I mean, me doing this podcast could be something that someone zeroes in on and doesn't like one perspective on it and decides to, you know, boycott or name call me. That's okay. It wouldn't be the first time. But what is the solution to this? Well, first I got to ask the problem. Is all this shouting and politics and all these things, is it really working? Is it making things better? Are we seeing tangible solutions to the issues of what divides people? And I would have to say, I don't think so. You know, there's kind of, when we talk about racism, there's kind of two camps. There are the camps of those who think there is no racism in our society and that it's, you know, something from a bygone age. And then there's people who think everything is racism and that whole groups of people are guilty. I happen to disagree with both. I mean, is it okay in today's world to say neither is true? I think racism is something that is with us and will always be with us. I think it's a horrible, repugnant thing when people discriminate against or stereotype against somebody based on the color of their skin or their nationality or their gender or their generation or their social class or their theological pet peeves. I think when we divide things, I think we're contradicting what Jesus envisioned the church and the world to be. I think when we fill our hearts full of hate, I think what we do is just create more hate. And like Jesus said back, if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. I think the very things that we are propagating and promoting might be the monster that we create that will eventually eat us. So what is the solution to this? How do we look at this and how do we train ourselves? First of all, I want you to know that Jesus envisioned the church, and as the early church fathers envisioned the church, they saw it as being color, gender, nationality, and socially level. And by that, what I mean is, like, you take this verse in Galatians 3 when Paul was writing to some Gentiles, and there's people who kind of followed him around to cause trouble, and he established a church there, and then they showed up and they said, okay, it's not enough that you follow Jesus and you become a follower of his, you actually need to become Jewish as well, which meant circumcision. I do not know how you would sell that to somebody. That seems an awful bizarre thing, you know, like someone saying, yeah, you serve Jesus, but, you know, there's one more thing we want to do, and you're like, you want to do what? But there were people doing that. And Paul said, that's all window dressing. It means nothing. He said, in the body of Christ, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor there male or female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. The ground is level at the cross. And so how do we learn to get along? How do we learn to work through our differences? Well, that's a good question. I think it circles around two concepts. The first one is the idea of loving your neighbors yourself. Now, the Jews, when they looked at the Old Testament, they kind of had these two statements that they thought were summations of the entire law. The first one is found in Deuteronomy 6:4, and it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And they saw that as a foundational stone to law. Just about every law that you saw could be tied back to that. And then they picked up on this second one. And the second one is interesting because it's kind of a side phrase. There's this whole bunch of things, I believe it's listed in Leviticus, where, treat the foreigner among you this way and treat your, people this way and do not take advantage of this. And then it says kind of as a sidebar, you shall love your neighbors yourself. The Jews picked up on this second statement and believed it was another cornerstone for all law. And Jesus affirmed their view of this. And so they held that if you wanted to sum up the entire Jewish law, it was love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, there's a time Jesus actually broke into a little more detail on this when he was questioned by a teacher of the law who asked him to summate the law. And Jesus came back with the love the Lord your God, love your neighbors yourself. And it said the man, maybe he was expecting something different, but he wanted to justify himself. When you're an intellectual, you like to be able to show off your smarts to other people. It makes you feel good about yourself. And so he thought he would throw one of those questions that intellectuals love to ask. If you say, well, I love my wife. Well, what is love? And so he sent out this question, and who is my neighbor? Now, I would imagine people sat in the courts of the temple in those days and had all kinds of debates about what a neighbor was and who's your neighbor and would this person be a neighbor, and where does a neighborliness stop and where does it start, and all those kind of things. But instead, Jesus told them a parable, a story. And in order to understand the context, probably the two people who hated themselves the most, or hated each other the most in a racist, but in other ways, were the Jews and the Samaritans. The Samaritans, these went way back right to Solomon's son Rehoboam, but the northern and southern kingdoms split. And the northern kingdoms eventually were conquered by an empire, the Assyrians, horrible people. They were really the Nazis of the old days. They did horrible things to people. And one of their tactics in order to eliminate a nation is they took the northern Jews and they intermarried them with other people so that they would never be purebred Jews again. Now, the Jews picked up on this and decided to treat them as not Jews, even though they had some of the same customs, some of the same laws, some of the same rules. They kind of created this dual system. So the northern kingdom had their own temple, their own holy city, their own laws, their own rules. And when you would ask them, they say, we're the true, and it went south to the Jerusalem, and the Jews would say, no, we're the true. And they hated each other. They wouldn't even go through each other's territory. Certainly wouldn't talk to each other. And one of the most interesting things in the New Testament is Jesus' interaction with Samaritans and the reaction of his disciples and the people around him when he did this. But he tells a story. He tells a story of a man who's beat up and left bleeding and dying at the road. He's robbed and left naked. And then Jesus gives examples of the two people who would probably be considered most righteous in the world of his hearers. And that would be a teacher of the law or a Levite or a Pharisee. And how they came upon this man, but instead decided to cross a road and walk on the other side. They didn't interject on him. And then he tells a story about a Samaritan, and he says, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. It goes on later to say that he left some money for the innkeeper and said, if you take care of him, if he needs anything else, I'll pay you when I get back. And Jesus asks this intellectual, the simple question. Okay, which one was a neighbor? Now the teacher of the law responds, the one who took care of him or who was good to him. He couldn't even say Samaritan. And Jesus said, good, go do likewise. And it was just, the impact on his hearers would have been dramatic. But that's what it's about, isn't it? You get a man, and they had all this history. They would have all this racism. They would have all this disagreement. And you have a man who is willing to cross a cultural, racist line in order to take care of another man. When Jesus talks about, do unto others, you would have them do unto you. I mean, if you were that person left dying at the side of the road, would you care who took care of you? But it was more important that someone saved you. Well, that's the same attitude a Christ follower has. We don't see people by the skin color, gender, generation, or social group. What we do is we see people as made in the image of God and precious in his sight. So let's put some legs on this. How should we act as followers of Christ? Well, the first thing is recognize that we all inherit some prejudice. I'm not a big fan of systematic racism, but there are some things we pick up over time. And part of this is just a natural cognitive exercise we all do, where you run into certain people from a certain group or a certain city, and maybe they talk a certain way, or they joke a certain way, or they have kind of these little, foibles or whatever. My son is engaged to someone from the States, and she came up to visit us and cross the border, and she was in Niagara Falls. And she went in this bathroom, and a woman saw that she had been waiting, said, "Oh, sorry." And she was blown away by this. Because the idea that you would apologize for doing something that you had every right to do, and then come out and find out somebody was waiting, well, they were supposed to wait, that's what you're supposed to do and all that. But then to apologize for it was shocking to her. And sometimes those generalities, they have some good shortcuts we can have to maybe understanding how people are different. You can't have no generalizations or no understanding of people. If you really get to know them, you do find distinctive things about different types of people. So recognize that, but recognize where you prejudge. And where you prejudge is what I mean is you determine that certain people are either beyond your ability to love, or you see people are beyond your ability to help based on their either choices or ethnicity or political or their gender or their age or how much money they have. You come to conclusions to where, you know what, I'm going to love lots of people, but that one isn't going to make the list. In fact, we get to a place where we not only prejudge them, we hate them. And you know what? There is some wisdom in learning to listen. Probably the biggest travesty of our day right now is the fact that everybody's shouting and nobody's listening. And I wonder sometimes if I think this is true. You can take somebody that's completely different from you and sit down and have a conversation and learn some things about them and find out that people are incredibly complex. Prejudice, one of the travesties of racism is it simplifies people to the lowest common denominator and then paints everybody like that's them. When in reality, we all have things that are distinct about us. We all have many complexities. One of the things I hate about racism is that when you simplify people that much, you really dehumanize them. Look at how God created us and how much precious complexity he put into who we are. And then think about what it would take. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we need to discourage the idea of divisions among the body of Christ. We all come together as Christ followers, even though we're all different. And God actually looked at the church as being an example to everybody of what a follower of Christ should be. This was actually supposed to have an impact on the world around us. Jesus in his prayer in John 17 said, "I pray for those who believe in me through their message, that they may all be one, so that they may be brought to complete unity, that the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me." He wanted our ability to see past our differences. What theological scruples or things do you look at other people? I'll never forget a few years ago we did a campaign where we were talking about, reaching some more young people. There was kind of a group we were missing, and so we learned about them. I find the more you learn about people, the easier they are to love, right? So we were learning about them and things. But I'll never forget there were some people that didn't want to reach out to that group. And you kind of pigeonhole them, and they were like, oh, they're rude to me. They're not this. They can't hold down a job. They can't do, all this kind of stuff. And I kind of challenged that and said, oh, so this is the people we're supposed to not introduce to Jesus Christ. These people are so bad that even Jesus can't save them. I mean, think about that. That's ridiculous. But that's sometimes what happens to us when we kind of get comfortable and don't reach out. The second thing we need to do is be willing to cross the line in identifying and reaching out to other people. And a lot of this is based in forgiveness. Jesus, there's one command he put on us that I sometimes find hard. And it's this, is that he won't forgive us if we don't forgive others. And, when I was young, that was really easy to do. Because, I had some people that wronged me, but, you just seem to have that flexibility. But I tell you, when you get older and you get somebody that really stabs you in the back, someone that really hurts and wounds you, I'll tell you, the temptation to hold on to that is so strong. But Jesus says, you have to let that go. Let me take care of it. Let me take care of those injustices and learn to forgive. So that's the first part. Forgive them for whatever past experience you've had. Maybe there's been people from a certain age group or a certain city or a certain gender or a certain age group who have treated you a certain way, and that hurt you. And you, somewhere in your heart, you said, I'm never going to talk to those people again, or they're not worth my time. I want to challenge you in that. How many of those people did Jesus cross barriers to interact with? Like we look at the Samaritans as kind of innocent parties in ancient history, but the truth of the matter is they did some awful things as Samaritans, including trying to prevent the Jewish nation from reestablishing itself at one point. They threatened them with war, and the Jews had a hard time letting go of that. But here's Jesus. He brings together the church, and as the church started, it started mostly Jewish, until it started to spread out and the message of Jesus started reaching other people. And this was difficult for the early church to get their mind around. It's a real interesting challenge. And one of the culminations of this was found in Acts chapter 15, when they saw that many non-Jews were coming to faith. And the question was, do we have to make them Jewish to make them follow Jesus? And the answer came back a resounding no. It's interesting because they put some qualifications. Well, don't do this and don't do that, so you don't offend the Jews among you. But really, 2 out of those 3 things ended up getting dropped anyways. There was just the other things which were based in moral law that stuck with the early church and have been carried down to us, which I think is right. I was watching a movie recently, and the theme of the movie was one of these movies where they make this quote. Is people only use 10% of their brains. And if we could use a greater capacity of our brains, it's amazing what we'd be able to accomplish. This actually has been disproved. What they've found is there's different areas of your brain that are used in different circumstances, and some of them get latent over time. That's why some of us, when we get a little older, our memory gets worse, or you walk into a room and you don't, a lot of people say that you're more forgetful. Actually, what that is actually a basis of experience. If you've gone into a room 70,000 times and you go in and don't remember what you're supposed to get, a lot of times it's because you have so many memories and you've gone in that room to do so many things, it gets clouded out. So it's not, say this to make yourself feel better. It's not you have a bad memory. It's that you're just so smart and have so many experiences that sometimes one kicks the other out. That's what I do to make myself feel better. But anyways, this has been disproved. But here's something I think that is a little more verifiable. And that is we only use a certain percentage of our morality. Think about that. As human beings, think of every good thing you could do and then take your day and go, am I reaching that level? And every single one of us is going to go, no, we have fallen short of the glory of God. There's no way we've done all those things. But I wonder, an interesting exercise, because Jesus talked a lot about seeking after righteousness and those of noble and good hearts who, are hungry for righteousness. And he talks about how precious they were in God's sight. I wonder if I am right now 12% moral. What would happen if I became 15? What if I was, 4% and I bumped that up to 8%? What if I was 20% and I bumped it up to 23%? That's a goal worth contemplating. So as I learn to forgive those who I find the hardest forgiving, does that grow me morally? Yes, it does. And then reach out and get to know them. One of the most interesting stories is one by is a man named Daryl Davis, and he is a black man who in the States is a musician and has made his life's mission beyond music, reaching out to members of the Ku Klux Klan. Enjoy this clip because I think it says it all.
Now, they would give speeches, I would take more notes, and try to absorb and try to understand, not that I'm believing in what they're preaching, but I'm trying to learn and understand what is the impetus for it. So, after a while, CNN got wind of this and wanted to do a story on me. They knew me as a musician. They knew who Mr. Kelly was as a Klan leader. So they followed me to a rally. First, they came to my gig on Friday night to show what I really do. And then Saturday morning, they followed me to a Klan rally 2 hours from my house. And they said to me, "Do you think Mr. Kelly will even talk to us?" I said, "I will do better than that. When this rally is over, I will get Mr. Kelly, the Imperial Wizard of the Klan, to come to my house and you can interview the Klan leader inside a black man's house." They said, "Oh, okay." So they filmed the rally. And when the rally was over, I spoke with Roger Kelly, told him what was going on, and he agreed. He drove without his bodyguard 2 hours out of his way, sat in my basement, and interviewed with CNN. And this clip was shown every hour for 24 hours all over the world. I'm going to show it to you right now, and I want you to pay particular attention to what Mr. Kelly says. He says that even though he and I would do different things together, it did not change his views on the Klan, because his views on the Klan had been cemented in his mind for years. Then he goes on to say how he believes in separation of the races, because he finds that to be in the best interests of all races. But listen to what he says about respect towards the end of the clip. Please show the clip.
Davis is one of the few African Americans you will ever find attending a KKK rally. More than attending, he is welcome.
I got more respect for that black man than I do you white niggers out there.
It's been a tough day for the Klan. Their Maryland rally found many local residents rejecting the message of white separatism. After it's over, Daryl Davis hangs around backstage with his friend, Klan wizard Roger Kelly. It's not unusual for blacks and whites to be friends, but it is unusual to find a black man and a Klan leader chatting pleasantly over an orange soda after a Klan rally. The relationship started over a book Davis was writing. His secretary set up an interview with Roger Kelly, but didn't tell him Davis was black. They talked and talked some more. Davis learning about the Klan, Kelly learning about Davis.
We get to know one another and we do different things, it hasn't changed my views about the Klan, because my views on the Klan's been pretty much cemented in my mind for years.
Kelly and his Klan friends go to hear Davis and his band. And Davis goes to their rallies.
I sat on the front row and listened to each Klansman speak. Some things I agreed with, other things I did not agree with.
Davis thinks that his presence promotes badly needed understanding.
Hate stems, I believe, from fear of the unknown, and I think this is all across the board, regardless of whether it's a Klansman or anything else.
But he has no illusions about the Klan. If he did, his friend would be quick to disabuse them.
And I believe in separation of the races. I believe that's in the best interest of all races.
Does he really? Or has friendship transcended the color barrier? Listen to Kelly at a Klan rally.
I will follow that man to hell and back, because I believe in what he stands for and he believes in what I stand for. A lot of times we don't agree with everything, but at least he respects me to sit down and listen to me. And I'll respect him to sit down and listen to him.
The strange relationship of a KKK wizard and his black buddy. In Washington, I'm Carl Rochelle, CNN Sunday Morning.
Respect is the key. Sitting down and talking, not necessarily agreeing, but respecting each other to air their points of view. Because of that respect and my willingness to listen and his willingness to listen to me, he ended up leaving the Klan, and there's his robe right there. I am a musician, not a psychologist or sociologist. If I can do that, anybody in here can do that. Take the time to sit down and talk with your adversaries. You will learn something and they will learn something from you. When two enemies are talking, they're not fighting, they're talking. It's when the talking ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence. So keep the conversation going. Thank you all very much.
Breathe, breathe in your peace. Be the calm my fighting soul needs. When I'm weak, you are strong, and you say that I am yours. And fear has no place, and the darkness cannot remain. As you speak over me, and you say that I am yours. The battle rages, but you have won the war. You see my sin, still you have called me yours. And there is no fear now that you haven't conquered. And all these demons, they run at your command. All of my shame falls away in your hands. And there is no darkness where you don't shine brighter. Break forth the light with a word. You silence the night. From the dark I will rise, and I will say that I am yours. The battle rages, but you have won the war. You see my sin, still you have called me yours. And there is no fear now that you haven't conquered. And all these demons, they run at your command. All of my shame falls away in your hands. And there is no darkness where you don't shine brighter. My cry in the battle, my strength in the war, is Jesus, my Savior, and death is no more. I stand on the promise of all that you've done, so I fight from the victory you've already won. My cry in the battle, my strength in the war, is Jesus, my Savior, and death is no more. I stand on the promise of all that you've done, so I fight from the victory you
dreams and visions go beyond what we can see. Our hearts united in the wonder of it all. We stand united in the wonder of your love. Fully devoted, we follow after the one who gave it all. Christ alone be praised. Fully devoted, we follow after the one who gave it all. Christ alone be praised. There's no limit, your word is reaching all the earth. All consuming, your love is bringing hearts to life. Oh, our hearts united in the wonder of it all. We stand united in the wonder of your love. Fully devoted, we follow after the one who gave it all. Christ alone be praised. Fully devoted, we follow after the one who gave it all. Christ alone be praised. No matter what it takes for the glory of your name, Christ alone be praised. We're stepping out in faith so the world would know your name. Christ alone be praised. No matter what it takes for the glory of your name, Christ alone be praised. We're stepping